Okay, we're going to move from UFOs to something 180 degrees a different direction. Our guest tonight in studio is Buena Tomalino. Buena began her website called Garden Inspires, a way to inspire others to garden, from beginners to those with more experience. She especially loves teaching others how to grow their own food. She's a landscape consultant and garden coach with formal education in ornamental horticulture from Utah State University. She's also a certified square foot garden instructor with over 20 years as a square foot gardener. Her experience includes consulting with hundreds of clients in designing and planting and maintaining such diverse gardens as herb, flower, native, and show gardens for individuals, businesses, and gardens open for public use. She's an author. She's written a couple of books. We're going to talk about her books. We're going to talk about what I've learned from her is that if you want to plant stuff, plant something that not only looks cool, but if you get hungry, you can eat it too. So, Buena, thank you so much for being here tonight. Welcome to Fringe Radio.
It's Beuna.
Beuna, sorry. I've known you for long enough. I shouldn't call you Buena. It is Beuna.
Yeah, it's a tough one. That's all right.
Well, thanks for taking the time and coming by tonight.
Well, thanks for having me.
Now, you've written, let's talk about, let's get a little bit of background. How did you get into gardening and that? I mean, I try gardening. I got a handful of tomatoes. I've done a couple of gardens over the years. Some years I get great results. Other years I don't get so great results. I've tried many different things. I think a lot of our listeners have done gardening. But how did you get into it and kind of decide that this is something that you wanted to kind of pursue and keep making better? And how did you get into it?
Well, I grew up on what my classmates called a farm, but it was just an acre of land, and we had chickens, a dog, cats. Mm-hmm. And we gardened, but we didn't have any choice of what was planted. It was pretty much zucchini, peas, tomatoes, corn, not a lot of variety. I wanted to grow some other stuff, and my parents just wanted to keep it what they considered more simple. I did grow peppers for the local food co-op, mm-hmm. things like that. I was interested in horticulture in high school, but kind of saw what was required as far as landscape architecture, decided not to go that way. Years later, I did go to college for a while, dropped out. Years later, I just took some classes at the botanical gardens that were in Kaysville and thought it was a lot of fun, and eventually actually applied to Utah State, and they took my credits from before and
cool.
Just continued on while I was having kids, and thought I wanted to be a landscape designer, which I enjoyed, but then I realized I more enjoy teaching people how to do stuff, especially if it's to grow their own food. So I specialize in edible gardening and organic methods.
Which means stay away from the chemicals, stay away from Monsanto, stay away from things that you buy in a bottle that have so many ingredients and you can't pronounce the words. It's probably not a good thing to spray on your garden or consume, but just natural type things that the earth provides.
Pretty much, and sometimes people think organic methods means no pesticides. And that's not true, but there's only certain ones that are really allowed if you're an organic gardener, especially if you're certified organic. But I don't need to use many pesticides at all. Mm-hmm. I rarely have a problem with anything. There's beneficial insects and birds and things taking care of it for me. And if you have healthy soil, you'll have healthier plants, which means more resistant to pests and disease.
And again, this year I did a little experiment. Last year I started a garden. I had really good results. Sadly, a hailstorm came through and wiped out my garden. I mean, it destroyed it. It froze everything. It hailed enough where it put down probably about, this was July of last year, it probably put down 3 or 4 inches of hail.
Wow.
I remember my wife Carol going out and back screaming and yelling because we put a fortune into the garden to prepare the area. And it's amazing how Mother Nature took it out in a matter of minutes. It actually froze all the plants from the hail being there. You know, some stuff survived, but the area that got wiped out had really good soil. We kept putting more compost, different things. And this year we planted tomatoes, and I mean they're like bushes. They're 4 or 5 feet tall. They have produced just tons of fruit, because a tomato is a fruit, correct?
Yes.
It produced tons of tomatoes, green ones that are slowly turning red in the pantry, but it was amazing. And this year we didn't use any fertilizer except some cow manure that we had a couple bags in the backyard from last year. Just sprinkled it around, and a little bit of diatomaceous earth to take care of the bugs. And the results were unbelievable.
Well, and vegetables, of course, aren't the only edibles you can grow, and you can't prevent everything from happening that Mother Nature does. But if you grow a variety of stuff, you have a better chance of some things making it. A lot of people lost their apricot crop this year because of the temperatures, and that doesn't happen very often. But if you grow a wide variety of stuff, the chances are better that everything won't be destroyed by hail or frost or baking heat or whatever.
Yeah, it's crazy. One thing, talking about natural stuff, and we discussed this before, a little hint. Of course, this time of the year, we're seeing a lot of our eight-legged spider friends coming close to the house. One organic hint that you gave me, which really, really works. I'm in an area that I've got an older home, and we've had an issue over the years with spiders, big spiders. With my granddaughter coming over a lot now, I don't like things like that around, but yet I don't want to spray pesticides. But just citrus, natural citrus, absolutely wipes those big creatures right out if you have them. I had another black widow up here on the side of the house today, and I hit it with some of that orange citrus stuff, and that was the end of him or her, whatever it was.
And it said that peppermint works too, but citrus and peppermint, and you can use essential oils if you want. There's a certain one called Orange Guard that's the purpose of it, and you can spray it around your foundation or in your house. And it's supposed to help with spider and insect problems.
Gotcha. Do they usually come in, or are they inside to begin with and want to get out?
Well, there's actually a website I found with the spider expert, and he answered all these rumors that go around about spiders. And it was very interesting, and he said that spiders mostly are indoor or outdoor spiders. So in most cases, if you take a house spider and put it outside, it will die. Now, black widows are an exception to that. They'll live either place. I have heard about more problems with black widows this year. I've only ever seen one at a time myself, and it's been several years ago.
Because they don't cohabitate.
Well, apparently they do this year, but they tend to, the females tend to eat the males, and they're not usually in a group. But from what I understand is that some of the spiders that aren't so dangerous to us can help control the other spiders like black widows, and they certainly control insects. And I've had a lot of people that have been really concerned about spiders in their yard, and I will remind them that the spiders are there killing insects, and so they're helping them. So unless it's something dangerous like a black widow, then I wouldn't worry about it. And you can get kind of used to the idea after a while if it's in a place that's a real problem for some reason, but otherwise just let them be and let them help you out.
Yeah, well, like I said, this year we didn't have too many inside. We had one big, huge one a month or so ago. I don't know what it was eating to get the size of it. I know that it took quite a few hits with a shoe to even get it to stop. I mean, it was a pretty robust little bugger. But anyway, there are things that, like with the citrus and you said the peppermint, there's things that we can do to keep them out, to and not have to spray harmful chemicals. Again, some of that stuff is just horrendous, and it's interesting. Every now and then you'll see people, they'll see flies or mosquitoes or whatever, and they're spraying this stuff all over. They're trying to kill the doggone mosquito that may bite you or bother you, but you're standing there ingesting all this in. I don't think even some of these repellents, I mean, if you put a match in front of them and watch what happens when you put a little flame in front of them, what they'll do. Because of the volatility of them, and we're spraying them on our skin, and we're ingesting it and getting it on our hands, then eating food, and
And a lot of herbs, because of their scents, help repel mosquitoes and other insects. And so it's not just citronella. I can't stand the smell of citronella myself, but lemongrass, lavender.
Those when I was a kid growing up, them candles that every Italian wedding you went to, and they have the plastic net around them and.
Well, I actually never went to an Italian wedding, but
maybe that's a Chicago thing. I don't know.
But I have smelled some of those candles, and there's the ones that have chemical repellents in them, and then there's ones that have citronella. I've seen some with other herbs too, and those aren't so bad. Lavender actually is one that helps repel mosquitoes, as well as a lot of the mints. And so all those things can help repel insects. And so you can use those inside and out. There's different organic sprays coming out now that have essential oils in them, and they can sometimes kill insects on contact and repel. And as far as spiders in the house, of course, spiders are eating insects. So if you can avoid having insects in the house, then there's not going to be anything for the spiders to eat.
I heard something. When it rains, spiders tend to come in more. Is that true? They don't care for water so much. I mean, whatever. It's weird. This summer, surprisingly, we didn't have many in the house. In the past, we've had, and we didn't spray anything down either. But do they come in more when it rains, or is that?
I actually have never heard that.
Okay.
So I don't know the answer. I know that when you see a little pile in a sidewalk crack or something where the ants are congregating and seem to be cleaning everything out, I've heard that when you see a bunch of that suddenly, that's supposed to mean that it's going to rain. And in some cases, I've seen that to be true.
Interesting. Let's talk about your books a little bit. And people may say, well, we're talking about gardening on Fringe Radio. Well, several times we've had different preparedness people here, and Beuna is definitely a prepper, and her books kind of go along with that. So let's talk about your books. It's Herbs to Know, right? And Herbs.
Well, Herbs to Know too, and Herbs to Grow.
And what I find great about these books, compared to a lot of them, you have pictures in there, and I think that the picture's worth 1,000 words, because we talked a little bit when the show started about how if you're going to plant something, it's nice to plant something that's pretty or enhances your property or what have you, but also something that you could potentially consume if you needed. And your books, not only do they have great descriptions, but they have great pictures, so people can see exactly what they're looking at. They know what the plant looks like. And
Herbs to Know or Herbs to Grow has a lot of the culinary herbs in it, plus some that people are less familiar with, like marshmallow. Almonds and saffron do grow here along the Wasatch Front, and they're in there. I picked it based on things that are easy to grow, and I tell you how. And then my co-author's a master herbalist, so she wrote medicinal use. I wrote how to grow, how to identify, and how to use, how to eat. But that book all has things that you would not find in the wild, but they can be attractive in your yard. One thing that I've had people say is, oh, I didn't know I had that in my yard. Now I know what I have, because they moved somewhere where someone else had planted oregano or whatever, and they didn't know till they got the book.
Now, you were telling me about these small, is it a cherry bush or some sort of a small ornamental bush that produces edible fruit that not only looks good, but the fruit tastes good as well?
Well, there's several shrubs that would apply to, but there's one called a bush cherry.
Okay.
And it gets about 3 to 4 feet tall. It's actually not mentioned in those, but I did do a blog post about it on my website. And it gets about 3 to 4 feet tall. You need 2 different ones for pollination. The fruit looks and tastes a lot like a pie cherry, but it produces later, so you don't have cherry fruit fly, which is a common pest here along the Wasatch Front in other cherries. And it produces soon. You don't have to wait a few years to get much fruit. And you can plant several of them as a hedge, or you can plant just a few here and there, and it's very attractive.
They grow pretty quickly. I mean, if you get do they grow into be a tall thing, or is it
just 3 to 4 feet tall?
Oh,
so if that's the size you need, you don't have to worry about pruning it to keep it small.
Gotcha. And does it grow pretty fast?
Sort of medium, but even when mine was only about a foot tall, I got a cup of fruit from each one.
Oh, wow. Well, that's not too bad. What are other good things that you can plant in your yard? I know you brought some plants, you brought some samples and stuff with you, but for our listeners, if you're going to well, first of all, here we are, we're coming up into November now. I don't know if planting season is over here in Salt Lake. Again, we have listeners all over the country. But in Salt Lake, we're starting to wrap it up. Are there things that we can get in the ground for next year? Or are we kind of at the edge of time to better off wait till spring? And what would be some good things to put in the ground right now that we could benefit from next year?
This is actually a really good time to plant because if you can get it in the ground, it is still growing over winter. The roots are still growing. So it's more ready to go in the spring. Plus, a lot of nurseries are having sales. So you can get better prices. The problem is nurseries are running out of stuff. So you may have a harder time finding what you want, but if you know what you want and where you want to put it, which that's the big thing. If you just buy it and then, hey, where am I going to put it? That's a problem. So if you have an idea of where you want to put it first, that's an idea, a better idea. And then you can get to the nursery, find out what they have, get those things planted, get them watered in really well. You may need to water it a few more times, just depending on how much precipitation we get. That really applies to anywhere in the country. So if you have snow on the ground or your ground is frozen, that may be more of a problem. If your ground is too wet, that could be a problem. But otherwise, you should be able to just go ahead and plant. So there's trees, shrubs, and perennials, all of those. And there's edibles in all those categories.
What works out well here in Salt Lake City? What's a good if someone wants to try, if somebody just says, I got well, it could be like our backyard that's just a disaster field. The grass is, we haven't watered it. The weeds have taken over. Very aggressive weeds have taken over the whole thing. So we're at a point where we're kind of ready to just scrub the whole backyard. And I don't know if I just want to start putting grass down. I was thinking about maybe some different plants, bushes, those cherry things you were talking about, and maybe more ground cover and stuff like that. Eliminate the mowing and make the ground more useful. What would be some good things for people to plant that would be good for next year and would get a good start?
Well, of course, something that you're willing to eat.
Okay.
Because you could always get it, and if you don't like it, it's still ornamental. But if you have an idea of whether you like it first, that's a good idea. And some things, if you've never had them, you're just going to be guessing. There is a shrub called a honeyberry that's a blue-fruited honeysuckle that can be used like a blueberry. And it's hardy to 40 below.
Wow.
It does not need acidic soil. We have problems growing blueberries here because they need acidic soil, so it's more difficult. So if you like blueberries, you could try a honeyberry and see if you like that. It's a shrub that gets about 3 feet tall. If you want something more shrubby, taller shrubby, or a tree, there's something called a serviceberry, which is native to Utah. You can find it in nurseries. The fruit looks kind of like a blueberry. It can be cooked and used in things like a blueberry, but you can eat it raw, and raw it doesn't taste like a blueberry at all. It's related to an apple.
And if you plant it now, you may get something out of it next year.
I'm sure you would, yes.
Okay.
Except the serviceberry, the birds may get all the fruit the first year.
Yeah, we did a bunch of strawberries and only had one out of about a dozen plants because I didn't cover them with anything, and they just swooped in and cleaned them out.
Well, something I heard about that, which I don't have birds that are eating my strawberries. I do have birds, but they haven't been fruit-eating ones, I guess, is to take red rocks, either paint some rocks red or get those kind of translucent ones that are used for decorative purposes, and put them in your strawberry bed before the strawberries ripen. And then the birds peck at those, and then when the strawberries come on, they just think they're more the same. I have had a couple people tell me that worked for them. And it decorates your bed, so you could try it and just see what happens.
Never thought about that. Andy writes in and says, could you ask your guest, I've got some things growing in my backyard. I bought an older home. They appear to be grapes. I'm not quite sure. It's a long email. What I think he's saying is, if you don't know what's there, he thinks he's got something that look like grapes. How can you test stuff to be safe? You don't want to. I know some things can be poisonous. Some things can make you sick. What's the best approach if you see something growing in big clusters or whatever, and you want to find out what it is and maybe consume it if it's okay?
Well, yeah, definitely don't taste it to test because some things are deadly that way, even a small amount. It could be Virginia creeper or Boston ivy, which has a very similar looking fruit. And sometimes people plant them with grapes, which is a bad idea. So there's a couple things. He could take a leaf and the fruit into the extension service in his county. Every county in the United States has an extension service. In Utah, it's connected with Utah State University. Another thing is I do things like that for people. As a garden coach and landscape consultant, I go out to people's houses and help them identify things, give them ideas where to plant things. You could ask somebody else, but just make sure they have the credentials that you know that they know what they're talking about.
Right. Matter of fact, we have a neighbor to the south of us, to the west of us, and I don't know what they've got things coming over our fence. They look like grapes. They look like grape plants. I guess I'll need to get a couple and show them to you. Carol's like, I'm not going to eat them. You can try if you want. But they also have this, I don't know what you would call it, but every year it grows up and over the fence. It stays pretty, I shouldn't say dormant, but it doesn't grow much or do much. And then toward the late end of summer, it sends out these streamers that probably grow out, I'm going to say 15 to 20 feet and grow leaves out of them.
Wow. Have you noticed any fruit on it?
No.
Does it have leaves all through the winter, or does it drop them?
No, they die. The vines die in the winter, and then they come back. They cover the fence again, and I've actually cut chunks of this stuff out of the fence because it, makes it a little bit of a mess. But they grow very aggressively. They actually go over the top of the fence, come down, and then run out streamers, 15, actually 20 feet long, with leaves. And then again, when winter comes, that's it. They die off, and in the spring they're not there, but then they shoot out again. So when they die off, the vine is obviously it's not what am I thinking? It's stringy enough. It's got to be something that breaks down pretty quickly.
Okay. You can show it to me and I can help you out. It's kind of hard to tell by a description like that. The Virginia creeper and Boston ivy that I was talking about look pretty similar. They have a leaf that's sort of like the palm of a hand. One of them has the leaflets are all more separated, and the other one they're more together. That's the best way I know how to explain it. But usually I can identify whether it's a grape or not just by the leaf. But it's good to see multiple parts of the plant, like a flower in a leaf or a fruit in a leaf or something like that. There's some things that have very distinctive smells, and they may look like something else, but I can tell more positively by smelling it. And that wouldn't be true with a grape, but that's just one example. There's just different things you notice about the leaves, the texture, the edges of the leaf, the veins, and of course the flowers and fruit for help in identification. Some of the really aggressive vines here are Boston ivy, Virginia creeper, and trumpet vine. And of course you would have noticed the flowers on a trumpet vine because they're bright orange and big.
Yeah,
so.
This has no flowers at all on it,
Okay.
but it like I said, it sent out a ton, probably 100 plus streamers. Doesn't seem to affect the lawn or nothing. They just kind of crawl over the lawn or grow over the lawn. But yeah, I'll have to bring some in. For listeners that are listening here, your website is called gardeninspire.com. Where can they get your books at?
Well, there's stores that sell them
Okay.
listed on my website, or they can contact me directly. They can get them from Amazon.com. When I have events where I'm teaching or something like that, I have them for sale there when I'm allowed to, which usually is the case. I have a calendar on my website for all those kinds of things that are open to the public.
Now, you do a lot of classes too, correct?
I do,
Quite a
yes.
few of them.
Uh-huh.
If we could kind of switch over a little bit to the prepper side and being prepared, and that's kind of how we ended up meeting, is we both are in some form of the preparedness industry. People, this year, 2015, has been a crazy year. I mean, in the past, I think people have stocked up on food storage and stuff, but as a national norm, preparedness stuff, dehydrated, freeze-dried foods, distributors, manufacturers, they can't produce this stuff fast enough. I think that, of course, with our economic climate kind of up and down all over the place, the political climate's all over, and I'm not going to get into talking politics or religion or anything like that. But I think we're seeing a lot of changes. A lot of things are happening, and I think a lot of people are starting to realize that, if tomorrow my world gets turned upside down, I better have something. I think a lot of people, including myself up until recently, we just have what we got in our pantry. I mean, we're used to go, you need a gallon of milk, you go to 7-Eleven, you get the gallon of milk. You need a loaf of bread, you go to the store and get it. You need Twinkies, you go buy. I mean, you can get anything you want. It's just a matter of convenience. We pick up, jump in our car, and go. But here in the state of Texas right now, of course, with Hurricane Patricia, the flooding is just. I was watching a news report this afternoon. There's some counties getting 5.5 inches per hour. The flooding is just horrendous. The droughts in California now, the flooding. The East Coast is getting snow already. Here, and of course up and down, in our state, probably one of the biggest things above and beyond anything is we're probably due for a major earthquake. We have a fault line that could make San Andreas look like child's play. Some of the experts say that it's due to happen here, and you get cut off. Society kind of stops happening. I mean, stores are destroyed, streets are destroyed, whatever. It's really important to be able to survive and not have to go beg or take other measures to feed yourself and your family.
That's true. And there's people that do have an interest in gardening from that standpoint, but some of them are going to wait till that happens to garden.
It's too late.
And yeah, you really need to start learning now. Just like anything else, if you want to learn how to do it, you don't wait till you have to know to learn.
And you can garden in a real small area. I mean, you don't have to
Yeah.
have a half acre and a Troy-built rototiller to garden. I mean, you can, even if it doesn't look the greatest, you can garden in old containers. I saw, I don't know if you do this or not, but I saw a guest that we have periodically on our program is we have the Wisconsin vegetable gardeners. There are a couple from Wisconsin that have been doing a podcast, and they've been on television several times. They grow stuff in bags, in different types of, all kinds of stuff. They kind of scavenge off the street. Somebody throws away their old tomato cones or whatever you call those things. They go and grab them, straighten them out, and reuse them again and plant in all kinds of different containers. And they just, get an abundance of food out of it.
Well, I do have some land, but I do experiment with different methods because it's easier for me to help people if I'm doing that. And almost all my house plants are edible, and that's been true for a long time because those are things that I can't grow outside and have them survive through the winter. And so why not? And if you even have an apartment, anybody should be able to grow something to eat, even if it's just one pot of chives or one pot of mint or something.
Do you start a lot of your plants from seeds inside the house, or are you more of like me? You go to the nursery and pick up plants that are already established. I know one thing that I've watched a lot of YouTube videos about, getting some grow lamps and stuff like that. From an economic standpoint, the initial investment it's kind of expensive, especially if you get the grow lamps and the racks and all the other stuff. And something that I've also noticed is a lot of people, even just starting from seed, tomatoes and different things, little aphids and bugs can be a real issue. It's amazing those things can even find their way in your home in the middle of winter. But so do you do that? Do you start stuff from seed, or do you buy plants, or?
Well, I start quite a few things from seed, mostly tomatoes and peppers. Some things can be planted right out in the garden, and it really doesn't make sense to start them from seed.
Okay.
So a lot of the leafy things, so lettuce and spinach, those kinds of things that just make sense to plant them out in the garden. Usually you can do that in March around here. But tomatoes and peppers, I like to start my own. Sometimes I end up buying more because I wanted more of them than, I decided I needed 16 instead of 10 or whatever. There's a lot of advantages to doing that. For one thing, it's something you're learning that you didn't know how to do before, but also you can choose how they were grown. You can choose what varieties you want instead of just choosing from what they happen to have at the nursery. You can choose when you're going to plant them outside.
Well, and again, if you grow enough of them, you can can them. I mean,
yes,
we had enough this year. We're not going to can them. We've been giving them away and just been consuming them. But our 6 plants that we put in, again, in good soil, just turned into huge bushes that yielded tons of tomatoes. And if again in a survival type of situation, for what we paid for. I went over to the local grocery store, was just having a clearance, and I bought the little six packs of plants for 99 cents a piece. They're already 5-6 inches tall. Stuck them in the ground, and literally within weeks they were they were growing like weeds back there. And I kind of wish that I did. I wish I would have had and set up for canning. But again, being prepared, you know, even if things go to heck in a handbag, if you're on your own property, you can still garden in your backyard.
Well, and dried tomatoes are really good, and that's an easier way to do it. But as far as growing from seed, I don't buy grow lights. I buy one cool and one warm fluorescent. It's about half the price.
Fringe Radio Zone. Our guest here live in studio is Beuna Tomalino. Thank you so much for taking time out of your night to come here and talk about this stuff.
Sure, happy to be here.
Preparedness. Couple comments that I saw in the chat room here is about I think preppers. How do we define a prepper? I think the term is. I think it's just kind of a cliche. People anybody that has a little bit of food storage is kind of a prepper. But you really made a good point on the break. Doesn't mean that it has to be a natural disaster, a zombie apocalypse, or anything like that. Losing a job, divorce, whatever it may be. I mean, there's a lot of things that can happen where it would be nice. I mean, I think the average person for a family, and I don't know, and it depends where you shop and stuff like that, but I would say the average family probably consumes $300 to $500 a month in food. Realistically, a family of, let's say, 4 people. Yes, there are cheaper ways to do it. You can eat ramen noodles 3 times a day, or drink Kool-Aid or whatever. But I mean, I think food is expensive. I went grocery shopping today on the way home from work today, and got a few bags at the local discount store, and it was $35. So again, if you get in a situation where maybe money just stops coming in, it's nice to be able to feed your family, feed yourself out of your food supply.
Well, and I have seen truck strikes in my life that have emptied out stores pretty fast.
Right.
And even since then, stores stock even less than they did in the past. So it would not take very long, whether it's there was some road damage, some highway damage down near Vegas and St. George.
Right. That was a year ago.
And it stopped trucks for a while.
Right.
And it wasn't long enough for people to really notice, but it could have been longer.
Right.
And that's not out of line to think that something like that could happen again.
Or just a bad snowstorm,
Yeah.
Where it kind of catches you. I know here in Utah we don't have it too much, but back, where I come from Chicago, we have problems with ice storms where everything just gets, an inch of ice over it. The roads are, while they may not be impassable, you just slide all over the place. Just getting out of your home is a nightmare. Where you may end up just getting stuck in the house for a few days. And if you've got a family that's stuck there with you, it's you never know. It's good to have food, at least to be able to feed your kids and feed your family.
Well, and with the drought in California, I think a lot of people don't realize how much food for the whole western U.S. at least comes from California.
Right. Kind of a shame, we're constantly here in Utah. I mean, we got a lot of rain this spring, but we're still way down with the water table. You go to Las Vegas, you look at all those pools and fountains and stuff like that, and they're out in the middle of the desert. They're always crying about water. It's kind of amazing, although I guess again that's what it comes down to. It's about money and spending money. How much water is just wasted there for a view or for a look, or you know what I mean? It's kind of amazing. And even in California, you have, of course, people try to conserve, but yet you've got big corporations that have waterfalls and huge fountains out front. And yeah, they look calming and relaxing and stuff, but they consume so much that people need to drink.
Yes.
Your books, let's talk about those a little bit. During the break, you mentioned a few things you'd like to go over.
Well, Herbs to Know 2 is a book that has about wild plants that you can find in Utah. And you'd also find them in Idaho, Wyoming, some of them all over the world, but all of them can be found in Utah. It's just what you said before. It has a nice picture. Also, my co-author wrote about medicinal use. I wrote about how to grow, identify, and eat. Some of them are what people would call weeds. And then other ones are ornamental plants that can look really nice in your yard. You may even have some of them in your yard right now and don't even know that they're edible.
Really?
Yes.
So some of those weed things may be edible and you can eat them and maybe they'll do some good.
Yes. And when people think of wild plants, they tend to think that it must taste bad. But that's not necessarily true. I tried to put quite a few in here that actually taste good. Serviceberry is one I mentioned earlier. It's in there. Purslane is a flat growing weed that is succulent. That's how you can tell it from some of the other weeds, and there is a great picture in there. It's actually sold in markets in other parts of the world and in some ethnic markets here. It tastes good. You can eat it raw. People just think, oh, that's a weed. Weed means a plant in the wrong place.
Oh, okay. It makes sense. Makes sense. Do some of these some of these weeds, and we discussed this before, my yard, my front yard, next year, I'm going to use your services. I'm going to remove 2/3 of my front lawn because we have two huge maple trees in our yard. They're probably 60 plus years old. They're beautiful trees. They provide great shade. We've got a nice patio. You can sit out there in the summer. It's nice to have the shade. But there's areas that I don't know if it's just, I don't know what it is, but the grass just does not want to grow, and we get weeds that come in, and they're just vicious. I've had some that I know you're going to cringe, but I actually had a resort to Roundup to get rid of them. And believe it or not, some of them are coming back up again. So I'm going to find some way to get rid of them, if it's going to mean bringing a bobcat in or gasoline and burning them. And I'm going to put in bushes, and I'm going to bring in tons of bark, several yards of bark. But some of these weeds, they're just hardy. I mean, they just go and go and go and go.
And some of them, if you planted them in the right place, nobody's really going to notice that that's a weed.
Mm-hmm.
Like purslane can look like a pretty nice ground cover most of the season. And then you can have it reseed in that place because it is an annual. But your grass is probably doing badly because most lawns are Kentucky bluegrass here, and Kentucky bluegrass does not do well in a lot of shade. So instead of continuing to try to work to get grass growing there, why not plant some shrubs, ground cover perennials that don't mind the shade? And it's not like you have to have every single thing in your yard edible, because other plants can just provide pleasure. They can attract beneficial insects, things like that. And so I do grow some things that aren't edible, but you could put some edibles in there, and then you could get all that benefit that you wouldn't have from a lawn. And a lawn is actually the most difficult thing to take care of.
Now, a question for you. Like you mentioned, Kentucky bluegrass is what most of the lawns are here, especially in my neighborhood. Again, our home is it's 60 some years old, so it's been around, and I would assume that's the original lawn that, probably back in the 50s, the owner went out and raked up the dirt and threw the seeds down, and that's kind of what's there. Is there ways to transform or convert your lawn? Is there ways that you can maybe put in some grasses, bring in some different varieties of seed, and in time transition to something a little bit, more hardy or better in the shade?
You mean as far as grasses?
Right.
If you want to grow grass in the shade, you're going to need to grow some kind of a fescue. And you can go get grass mixes that say fescue or dense shade. If that doesn't work, just give up on the grass instead of going to a lot of work. Instead, you mentioned bark, and you can do that. Mulches are great. If you just leave the ground bare, nature's going to fill it.
Right. Usually with things we don't want.
Right.
Right. Yeah, I've got a little section next to my driveway by the fence, and it's amazing. I dig that out probably 3-4 times a year, and the weeds that come back are just, it's amazing how quick they appear and take over everything. And some of them are pretty tough. I mean, it takes a ton of effort just to cut through them and dig them out and get rid of them. Although I mentioned we live on kind of a downsloping hill, and when it really, really rains heavily, the water actually kind of runs up into the driveway. It runs up into the front lawn, And then when it reseeds, usually a week later, we have a whole bunch of new things that have popped up in flower beds and what have you.
Well, and who knows, you might be able to add that to your salad and,
That's true.
you know.
That's true. And that's in your book.
Mm-hmm.
So is the book pretty much, are both of your books written for this part of the country?
Well, the herbs to know too, those are plants you can find in Utah in the wild, either in your yard, out camping, hiking, whatever like that. The herbs to grow are things you can grow here, but you could grow them pretty much anywhere. A lot of them you could grow in many different climates. The herbs to know too, I also talked to you about how to grow those. So even if you wanted to grow some of the weeds, I give you resources to get plants and seeds if you wanted to do that, although you probably have somebody that would be happy to give them to you. But some of the more ornamental ones, I talk about where to get stuff for that too.
Now, what I think is cool, when you do your classes, you actually bring plants in.
Right.
So people can...
Or parts of plants,
Parts
at
of
least.
plants in,
Yeah.
but at least people can smell them, they can feel them, they can
Right.
touch them, and get a visual on them. I'm looking on your website again. Beuna's website is called gardeninspire.com. Coming up, I saw you did a class today, but coming up in November on the 7th at Tractor Supply on Redwood Road in Woods Cross, you're going to do a book signing there and talk about your book so people can go there and pick up your books and get it signed. November 19th in Ogden, Utah, there's another big prepper event, a class on how to garden when your life depends on it. You're going to be doing that. And then on Friday, November 20th, from 7 till 8 o'clock at night, Natural Grocers at 500 South in Bountiful, Utah. You'll be there doing a class called What to Do with Fresh Herbs.
And that store actually isn't open yet. That's their grand opening
Okay.
week. And one that I just scheduled yesterday that isn't on the calendar yet, I'm going to be teaching a class at Feed the Birds in Bountiful on the 14th. So I'll be getting that on there.
Now that was one thing just you mentioned in that. Not in this house, but in the home that we used to live in, we took out a big section of our backyard and put a lot of ground cover and a lot of bark and stuff like that. And somebody years ago donated me some really, really big, cool birdhouses. And I put them up on 8-foot cedar posts. And I filled them with bird seed a couple of times. And all the birds came. And it was cool to watch the birds. But all the seeds that spilled over on the ground, within weeks, I had like alien-looking plants. I mean, like thistle-y type of stuff. All kinds of stuff. Obviously, you got to be careful with birdseed because if it hits the ground, it's going to germinate and it's going to do something. I know, and it created just hordes of weeds under my feeders.
So there's a couple things you can do. One is you can scrape the soil with something called a stirrup hoe. It looks like a stirrup on a saddle when they're small. Okay. And you're cutting them right off at the soil surface, and a lot of times when they're little like that, it will kill them, especially if they're an annual. Some people heat the bird seed up a little bit to kill the seed, like in their oven. I don't know what that does.
Roast it a little bit?
Yeah, I don't know what that does for the nutritional quality for the birds. I'm not sure. And there are thistle seeds that you can buy for birds, goldfinches, and things like that. So they may have really been thistles. Millet is really common in a lot of bird seeds. It's a little round, yellowish, and that's an actually really tasty grain. So if you wanted to grow it and harvest it, and you could cook it up like rice or something and eat it. And then, of course, there's sunflowers in there sometimes.
I know there used to be a store, they've since closed, but I think it was called the Bird House. It was over on about 13th West, and it was a little corner store. It was an old house that was turned into a store, and they sold all kinds of bird feeders and bird supplies. And I remember going in there years ago when I first moved out here just to check it out. I think I bought a couple little clay-type bird feeders. And I remember the lady that owned the store mentioned a couple times, she said, because I brought that up to her about the weeds from a past experience. And she said, if you usually buy the little higher quality stuff, don't go buy the big 30-pound bag for $5. There's a reason it's so cheap that a lot of times you won't get that. The birds will consume it. I know that I've bought the big W store brand bird seed and put them in our feeders out front. And it's amazing. We get a lot of birds, but they knock a lot of the stuff out of it. It seems that they're pretty smart. They can, even though it's all intermixed, you kind of find whole all over the ground the stuff that they don't care for and just dump out.
Well, it's a good idea to buy a good quality bird seed. And a lot of birdseed packages will have a chart on the back, or maybe the store will have a chart that says what seeds certain birds like. So if there's certain birds you want to attract to your yard, then that's the kind of seed you want to get. So maybe you only want to get black oil sunflower seeds instead of the whole mix. And then you don't have the birds knocking all the stuff out that they didn't want.
Well, in our yard, if the birds don't eat it, the pigeons come and they tear through it, and it's crazy. Beuna, the hour went very quick.
Yes.
I want to thank you for taking the time and coming into the studio tonight. Check out her site at gardeninspire.com. Please support her. She's got 2 great books. Any other books in the works right now?
Well, I actually have another book too that I wrote myself called What About Herbs?
Okay.
And I wrote it several years ago, and as an ebook. I just had it printed in May, and there's information on my website about that one too. I've been working on one with herb recipes. So we'll have how to use herbs just in your everyday kind of cooking, plus how to make poultry seasoning and taco seasoning, those kinds of things.
Sounds really good. Again, please support her. You can get her books at her website at gardeninspire.com. If you do a search, you can find her name on Amazon, and you can buy the books through there. If you get them through her website, I'm sure she'll sign them for you. And if you need that,
If you ask me to, yeah.
if you ask her to, and also if you need planning or consulting before you go out and start planting stuff, or you're thinking about laying out a whole lawn or curbing or whatever, you can go ahead, and she's for hire. And again, with all of her experience, you're going to get a nice yard and have a lot of success, because a lot of people kind of go crazy sometimes, I think, when they have that open palette and they start picking up stuff. I know I did years back when I had my first home. I'm like, oh, that's on sale, I'll grab it. That's on sale. When I found out why it was on sale, because nobody wanted it and they got rid of it, and then it turned out to be a lot of work. So again, Beuna Tomalino, her website, gardeninspire.com. Go check it out.